Chapter 1. I sketched the entrance to the palace where two giant stone warriors stood at either side of the central doors. They were there to guard the king. Somehow they had always made me feel safe. That is until they came to life and tried to kill me. That night still haunts me. Being awakened by a scream, my mother's blood-stained hands. What she had told me to do. I tried to push the thoughts aside as tears began to fill my eyes. My father was dead. I had seen his body. He had been stabbed to death in his sleep. And yet now there was another man wearing his face. How had nobody noticed that the king was a completely different person? I suppose people reasoned that he was acting different because his daughter had run away. The whole kingdom was looking for the missing princess, for me. It had been nearly 2 weeks since that dreadful night. I'd managed to keep a low profile as I trekked across the kingdom. I was able to borrow some common clothes off a clothesline. I felt guilty about it, but it had to be done. Thankfully it was spring, and the land was bountiful in fruiting trees, and the streams overflowing with fish. That is how I'd maintained myself thus far. Today would be dangerous. I would have to take a risk. I needed a map. So far I was working by memory and moving towards the mountains. But now I should hopefully be in the general area of the King's Rest. I closed my sketchbook and headed toward the small village I had seen yesterday. Soon I stood atop a grassy hill overlooking the fishing village. Strands of my hair blew with the sea breeze. The wind carried with it the smell of blooming flowers and dead fish. Below, a fishing boat was bringing in its catch. Workers and merchants prepared for its arrival on the dock. The village, which clung to the side of the coastline, was quite small, a few dozen buildings in all. I scanned the streets. People were going to and fro, going about the day's work. I saw no sign of the stone men who had been pursuing me across the kingdom. The statues were sent with the king's ring, which gives whoever wears it the ability to bring statues to life to do their bidding. Back at the castle, my father has a secret garden filled with particularly cunning statues. I could only hope that the impostor had not yet found it. I took a deep breath and started walking down the hillside. First, I would have to find some sort of disguise. I, the missing princess, am one of the most recognizable people in the kingdom, and I was being searched for. On the outskirts of town, I was able to find an old tattered cloth. I pulled it over my head like a bonnet, trying to hide my signature golden hair. My face was already gritty from the 2 weeks trek I'd been on to get there. Along the way, I had purposely laid out in the sun until I had gotten a deep tan. Maybe somewhere in the village I could pick up a brick of dye and color my hair, but the bonnet would have to do for now. I stood in the shadows of an alleyway, unsure of where to go. I'd rarely been away from the capital city of Sedil. I had no idea where I might find a map. I just had to see one long enough to sketch it in my sketchbook. I approached the outskirts of town with caution. Here the streets were mainly lined with homes, squat wooden structures with strong beams, I suppose to protect them from the coastal storms. Dirty children played in the streets, laughing and chasing one another. I smiled, keeping close to the buildings, trying not to draw too much attention to myself. As I walked deeper into the city, I saw more business establishments. There were 2 taverns, a blacksmith shop, a fish market, and a general goods store. The streets were busy with older people coming and going. I sighed with relief when I realized that the people were not paying any attention to me. My heart still pounded in my chest. I took a deep breath and told myself all I had to do was look and act like I belong here. The general goods store would probably be my best option for finding a map. I walked up the wooden steps and pushed the door open. The air inside was dusty. Light streamed through cracks in the wooden walls. Thick beams held up the roof. There were rows of shelves with goods stacked neatly. There were a few people shopping, and the plump man behind the counter was currently occupied. I stepped in between 2 rows of shelves and started my search. The first few shelves I looked through contained mostly dried food and household goods. There had to be a map around here somewhere. I heard a sound behind me and jumped. The plump merchant from behind the counter was standing at the end of the alley's way.
Looking for anything in particular, little lady?
The man wore a handlebar mush, and his arms was thick. I wanted to scream. My mind was launching into full-on panic mode. What if he recognized me? No, Smarara. Say something. I am looking for a map, I managed to squeak out,
Maps are just over there in the travelers section.
said the merchant, pointing to a shelf in the corner of the room. He eyed me suspiciously, and I nodded in thanks, and made my way to the shelf that he had directed me to. I scanned the dusty shelf. There were camping supplies, a bedroll and compass, hiking boots, rope, and a few other knickknacks. There at the end of the shelf, there was a neat little stack of folded maps. I sorted through them with my fingertips. There was a town map, a known world map. There, a map of Lapis. I unfolded the map and looked at it. I found the fishing village on the map. King's Rest was just north, and a little but east of here to the west was the ocean, and to the east the capital city of Sedili. Beyond that was the Guardian Stones, giant statues which protected our land. They served as our border. I propped the map up and pulled out my sketchbook. As fast I could, I copied the map into my sketchbook.
Hey, stop that.
I jumped at the sound of the merchant. He had spotted me from the other end of the row of shelves. Panic sieved me for an instant and I froze. But it was only a moment. I forced my feet and legs to work. I ran for the door behind me. I heard the merchant give chas. I ran out the door, jumped down the steps, and was into the street. I ran another block, then tried to blend in with the other people walking around the town. I looked back, and the merchant was not chasing me. I sighed with relief. I had gotten away. I was instantly filled with a sensation I had not felt before. A kind of exhilaration. I never got away with anything back in the castle. Smiling as I clutched my sketchbook with my new map inside. I now knew where I was and how to get to King's Rest. All I had to do now was make it out of the village without any more problems. I turned the corner onto the main street and stopped cold. I saw them. They were dressed like men. Everything was covered except their faces, and they were standing completely still, too still. Then I saw their gray faces of stone. Their stone eyes snapped to me. They were statues, and they were here to kill me. I turned on my heel and ran as hard as I could in the opposite direction. I could hear them pursuing me. They were much faster than the last ones. I darted down an alleyway and knocked over a stack of crates in the statue's path. A shopkeeper hollered at me, then cursed as the statues plowed through the crates, reducing them to toothpicks, but the crates didn't even slow them down. I made a sharp left at the end of the alleyway and was already breathing hard. I saw people around me. I must be on another main street, I thought. People were watching as the statues in men's clothing gained on me. Help, help me please, I screamed, wasting precious breath, for the people didn't even stir. The statues were bound to catch me. They could run forever until the wind and rain eroded their bodies away. Out of sheer desperation, I yanked away my makeshift bonnet and let my golden hair stream out behind me as I ran for another block. Ignoring the pain in my side, I wouldn't be able to run at this speed much longer. Then, in front of me, a man stepped out of the shadows with a raised bow. His arrow notch pointed straight at me. I dove to the ground and he released the arrow. I twisted to see it hit one of the stone men with a thud. The arrow bounced harmlessly off the statue's face, but it did stagger the statue for a moment. The other statue surged forward just 15 feet away from me. The man dropped his bow to the ground and drew 2 swords. He snarled at the oncoming beast and charged. He chopped at the statue's legs as sparks flew where the blades made contact with the stone. The statue punched at the man who nimbly dodged his fists. On my hands and knees, I slowly backed away, trying to escape, trying to catch my breath. Then the statue landed a punch, and blood streamed out of the man's mouth. The other statue was now on the man, but some townsman came to his aid. I turned my back on the scene, crawling away on my hands and knees, until finally I managed to get to my feet. There were sounds coming from behind me, terrifying sounds. In front of me, I saw a wagon full of pigs heading out of the city. While everyone was distracted with the fight, I jumped into the back of the wagon. I ducked down and hid amidst the dirty, stinky, sweaty pigs until the wagon was out of the village. I did not know where the pigman was going, and I could not afford to get myself lost. So I jumped out of the wagon as soon as I was able to do so without being seen. I found a grove of trees beside a stream in the forest. I hid there out of fear. I did not want to be out in the open with those things on the loose. It was only by chance that I had managed to escape, but I had probably given myself away in the process. My thoughts were racing. After a few hours, when I had calmed down enough, I washed the pig stench off me in the stream. Afterward, I felt totally refreshed. I looked at my sketch of the map. From here, King's Rest was only a day or two away on foot, just into a mountain range that crossed the northern part of the country. I needed to get moving. I decided that staying there that night would be dangerous, so I started walking. As I had the last 2 weeks, I stayed off the roads. There were still a few hours of daylight until I needed to find a place to camp for the night. The first 4 nights of my journey, I slept in the woods and fields, and I had been terrified and hardly slept at all. Then on the 5th night, I just collapsed from exhaustion. Since then, I was not as afraid, but I still wasn't sleeping all that well. Twice I had managed to sneak into a barn and sleep in a pile of hay. Those times were amazing. By the time the sun was beginning to set, I was feeling calm. The forest was beautiful there. I had been walking uphill most of the day, so I was at a quite high elevation by nightfall. I managed to pick some valence flowers, a medicinal herb that my father had taught me about. The trees were mostly pine, and the smell of pine needles was heavy in the air like an aromatic fog. There were also several sapphire blue ponds scattered about between the hills, glimmering in the early moonlight. I made myself a cozy bed of pine needles tucked against the trunk of a recently fallen tree. Then I gathered wood for a fire. I had always been told that making a campfire attracted unwanted attention, but I had risked it a few other nights, and nothing had happened. Besides, something about this pine forest made me feel safe. Before long, I was snuggled up against the log, warmed by the fire, and before I knew it, I was drifting to sleep. Chapter 2. In my slumber, I heard a snapping twig. My eyes snapped open, and my heart thumped in my chest. Even though I had just been ripped from my slumber, every molecule in my body told me something was not right. I needed to run. I tried to listen intently, but I did not hear a sound. By this point, I had enough experience sleeping in the forest to know that this was a very bad sign. I slowly raised my head and scanned my surroundings. My fire was down to orange coals, and the night sky was filled with a million stars. The smell of pine and smoke filled the air, but I could also smell the faint scent of blood. Then I saw him, a monster of a man standing at the edge of the smoldering firelight. All I could make out was his silhouette. He was tall and had broad shoulders. The hilt of a sword caught the light. My heart thumped in my chest so hard that I was frightened he might hear it. I didn't dare to move. Was it one of the stone men? A statue? I silently cursed myself for having built the fire. What was I going to do? Was this the end for me?
"Hello, princess."
The thing spoke. Even more fear crept up inside me, and I started to shake. This was no statue, for statues couldn't talk. This was a real person, and he knew who I was. Was this the shapeshifter that had murdered my father, here to complete the job? I gathered my courage and spoke. "Who are you?" The man stepped into the light, and I gasped. It was the man from the town, the man that had fought with the statues, whom I thought was surely dead. His face was battered with cuts and bruises, and one of his eyes was swollen half shut. There was dried blood on his face and hands.
"Oh, I think you remember me. You caused me a lot of trouble earlier with those statues. I couldn't let them get my prize,"
said the man, reaching behind him. "Your prize?"
"That's right. The king has put up a hefty reward for the safe return of the princess."
Terror struck me. No, I could not be taken there without the dagger. I wouldn't make it 5 steps into the palace before my blood would be spilled on the flagstones. No, please, I can't go back there, I pleaded, pressing against the log with my hands getting to launch into a run. The man brought his hands out from behind his back, holding a pair of iron cuffs.
We can do this the easy way, or the hard way, Princess, and I don't think that you will like the hard way.
A little way off I heard the neighing of a horse, undoubtedly the bounty hunter's, tied to a nearby tree. I knew that running would not be an option. You wouldn't dare put me in handcuffs. The king would order your execution as soon as you release me. His brows furrowed as if he had not considered that outcome. He stepped toward me, the handcuffs jingling in his hand, cursing sourly.
Never mind that. I will return you to the king and have the reward, one way or another.
He took another cautious step toward me, while simultaneously returning the cuffs to wherever they had been. Panic and fear flooded my mind, along with the gruesome image of my father's body covered in his own blood. Please, you don't understand. If I go back to the palace, he will kill me. Tears welled up in my eyes. I couldn't help it. I had come too far to fall short now.
Come now. The king wouldn't kill his own daughter. Whatever you have done is surely forgivable.
My father is dead, killed by a shapeshifter. I am the only one who knows the truth. The beast tried to kill me too, but I escaped. That's why those statues are hunting me.
I don't believe you. The man scoffed harshly. His words cut into me like a knife. Who would believe the word of a young, spoiled princess who ran away?
I sprang to my feet and sprinted left, but I only made it a few yards when something slapped against the back of my legs and wrapped around them. I fell to the ground hard, skinning my palms and cheek. I rolled over and tried to sit up, but my legs were tangled in some kind of rope snare. I pulled at the rope, but it wouldn't give any way I tried.
I told you we could do this one way or another. It looks like you just picked the hard way,
said the man. The handcuffs were back out. Wait, please, I can pay you. Whatever the king is offering, I can double it. The man laughed.
How could you, a spoiled, runaway princess child, come up with that much coin?
The treasure of Brandon I, king of Lapis, conqueror of Terra. I'm on my way to King's Rest right now.
The royal tomb is sealed. Only the king himself could enter it.
He sneered. I shook my head. As a direct descendant of Brandon himself, I can enter. And I could take you with me. My voice cracked. Bringing a stranger along to rob my ancestor's tomb was not a part of the plan.
How could you get in?
I'm not going to tell you that. Just know that you will be rich beyond your wildest dreams. The man rubbed his beard in thought as he peered down at me sitting on the ground, still tangled up in the ropes.
Very well. You have yourself a deal,
he said finally, and easily the snare from around my legs and helped me to my feet. We walked back to my makeshift camp. I sat on the log, trying to calm myself and come up with a new plan.
Oh, and Princess, if you don't deliver, I will be taking you back to your father. At most, you have only saved yourself a few days.
The next morning, I found myself atop of Vetti's horse. We were making good time, and at this rate, we would reach King's Rest by sunset. I had told Vetti last night that I could get inside the tomb, but the truth was that I had no idea how. All I knew was that it was possible, for that is what my mother had told me that dreadful night. I had seen my father's dead body, and the man wearing his face had been trying to kill me. My mother found me before he did, though. She cupped my face in her hands, and I'll never forget what she told me that night.
Samara, you must go to King's Rest and get Brandon's dagger. It is the only weapon that can be used to stop the statues. Your royal blood. You're the only one who can get into the tomb. The fate of the kingdom depends on you. Do you understand?
With tears in my eyes, I nodded. Then my mother showed me to a secret passageway, and I escaped into the night. As we continued on our journey, the terrain became rockier, and moss-covered boulders were scattered throughout the forest. Soon we would be on the edge of the Atlas Mountains. I knew little about King's Rest, except that it was not far into the mountain range, and it was in an ancient mine. Legends say that the mine went all the way into the heart of the mountain. That very stone was said to have granted the king power over the element. I, of course, knew the truth, that the king's power comes from a ring passed down from generation to generation, king to king. At last, we reached the entrance, which was not grand, just 2 pillars on either side of a cave in the side of the rock face. The pillars were inscribed with a message chiseled into the stone in several languages. It said, "Here lies Brandon, the Stone King, conqueror of this land and first king of Lapis, along with his descendants. Enter at your own peril, for even in death the king guards his own." There were 2 unlit torches hanging in holders from the pillars. Vedi lit them with a flint and handed one to me, and we plunged into the darkness. The cave walls were plain, and there was no evidence of a human tool ever being laid against them. It was dry and eerie. There were no stalagmites or stalactites. The cold air sent a chill down my spine, and I wished I'd had a coat.
Seems a bit odd that anybody could just walk in,
Said Vedi. "It's like a maze in here. It's nearly impossible to find the resting place unless you know where it is."
And you do know where it is, don't you?
"Of course I do. All of my family is down here. One day I will be too." The pit of my stomach dropped at my words. No, not all of my family was buried here. I wondered what the creature had done with my father's body. I pushed the thought from my mind. Now was not the time. The cave came to a fork, and I went to the left, then turned down another corridor. There were signs of mining now, with tool marks on the wall and timbers to help support the weight of the mountain from crushing down on the workers.
When was the last time that you were here?
Vedi queried. 2 years ago, when we laid my uncle Ferdinand to rest.
I remember hearing about that. He died in battle, and won great valor to his name.
I myself had barely known my uncle. He would show up every couple of years, bringing strange gifts from foreign lands. He had been an ambassador of sorts for Lapis, going out to the other kingdoms. I remembered that oftentimes his letters had worried my father. We walked on, turn after turn, and everything beyond the circle of torchlight was cast into complete darkness. The walls changed from those of a mine to hallways chiseled smooth. If one did not know any better, he might have thought that he was in a castle. The hall opened into an immensely large room, the cathedral. Sarcophaguses filled the room, arranged in neat rows. 2 stone gargoyles guarded the entrance. I did not know if magic had been used on them to make them come alive or not. I had never come here without an entourage, but the place sure felt eerie. Something just seemed off about it. The entire chamber was lifeless. Not even bats or rats entered this place,
This is not a place for the living.
whispered Vedi. We walked down the main alley on either side were the sarcophaguses row after row. My dead relatives encased in tombs chiseled on the sarcophaguses were the stories of their lives. Some, like my uncle's, were nearly covered, while others only had a few short lines of text. We kept on walking, going back in time as we glanced over the inscriptions. 5 sarcophaguses lined up leading to the door to the Stone King's tomb. 5 kings lived and died since he was king. Not counting my father, I am the 7th generation since the Stone King. Finally, we reached the other side of the grand cathedral chamber. A massive stone door stood before us, the doorway to the Stone King's tomb. It was intricately carved with ruins that predated Lapis itself. They were a remnant from another age, an age where terrible magic reigned on Earth. I studied the door, but I did not know what any of the stone markings meant. They seemed to swirl around a central circle, and in the middle of the circle was the imprint of a man's hand. I noticed that the hand was wearing a ring. Could this be Brandon's actual handprint? My mother had told me that I could open the door, but how? How was my mother so sure that I could open the door? What did I have in common with the man who rested on the other side, with all my ancestors. Unless I eyed the handprint on the door. "Hand me a blade," I commanded. Vedi pulled a thin skinning knife out of his waistband and handed it to me. I slid the knife across my palm, wincing as the cold steel bit into my tender flesh. I took a deep breath of the stale air, then placed my bloody palm into the handprint in the stone door. The original handprint was twice the size of mine. At first, nothing happened. Then the strange markings on the door glowed, emitting cool amber light. There was a rumbling sound, and the doorway slid to the side, revealing a dark chamber. Torches sprang to life, casting strange shadows around the room. In the center of the room was a massive stone sarcophagus completely covered in writing. On the walls there were murals of the Stone King's conquests, along with lengthy passages of text. Apparently, Brandon's sarcophagus was not large enough to tell his story. Along the wall there were also treasures and artifacts from around the world. Vedi headed straight to the goods, while I cautiously approached a pedestal at the head of the sarcophagus. The top looked like the hilt of a blade, with a pale stone gleaming on the hilt and a tattered lapis blue cloth tied to the end of the hilt. The strange markings that had been on the door were on the pedestal as well. There was also an inscription in the common language that I could read. It said, "In case the king's power should fall into the wrong hands, the heart was split in two so that balance and the kingdom may remain." I put both of my hands on the hilt and pulled. The strange markings glowed, and a breeze blew throughout the room. I pulled harder until Brandon's dagger came free from the stone. I admired the dagger in my hand, the wicked blade almost as long as my small forearm. The pale stone set in it seemed to glow in the torchlight. More of the strange markings adorned it, and for the first time in my 13 years, I felt powerful, like a true princess. I heard something move outside of the chamber, a scraping sound like stone sliding on stone.
"There is too much to carry,"
complained Vedi. "Grab whatever you like, but make it fast." "I don't think we're alone," I said hastily, making way back to the entrance to Brandon's tomb. There were more clanks and clatters as Vedi robbed my ancient relative's tomb. Then, finally, he stood beside me in the doorway, peering out into the pitch-black cathedral room. Something did not feel right. Something was definitely out there. Vedi must have felt it too, because he pulled his bow off of his shoulder and stealthily notched an arrow. I drew a deep breath, grabbed one of the torches, and threw it into the middle of the room. It tumbled onto the floor, casting eerie shifting shadows all around and through its light. I could have sworn I saw something move into the shadows. Together, Vedi and I slowly stepped into the cathedral, ducking along the wall so as not to be seen. We only made it a few yards when there was a rumbling sound.
"The doors are sliding shut."
Vedi gasped. I turned to look back and something sprang out of the shadows. I dodged back, but not quickly enough. Stone claws swiped across my shoulder, and I cried out in pain. My attacker was already throwing himself back at me, and all I could see was stone and claws. I closed my eyes and lashed out wildly with the dagger. Something connected, and there was a flash of cool blue light, followed by a hissing sound. He retreated back into the shadows.
"What the heck did you just do?"
shouted Vedi. "I don't know. What are those things?" I responded, panting from the surprise attack and trying to fight of the sheer panic coursing throughout my body.
"They are the gargoyles. They attacked us while we were distracted. But whatever you did made them back off."
I looked at him and saw a new nasty scrape on his head, but he didn't seem to care. He was notching another arrow.
"Here they come again,"
he hissed, backing away into the shadows. I was alone for only a second when the ugly gargoyle with thick, muscled arms and protruding bottom teeth lunged out of the darkness at me. Just when I thought I was done for, an arrow whizzed past my head and hit the gargoyle in the chest, slowing his advance. The moment gave me enough time to sidestep the attack and slice my dagger across the gargoyle's arm. The dagger should have bounced off of the stone, but it didn't. Instead, it dug into it, Blue light glowed from where the blade had connected, and cracks shot out of the stone like lighting. I watched in awe as a section of the gargoyle crumbled and fell way in the span of only a few seconds. The remainder of the arm fell to the floor with a thud. The gargoyle looked at me, snarled, and reared, ready to make a third attack. I plunged forward with my dagger, stabbed it in the heart, and he disintegrated in dull blue light. As the cloud of dust settled around me, I heard a cry. I turned on my heel to see Vedi by the torch, grappling with the other gargoyle. I could tell that despite his strength, Vedi was about to be overwhelmed. I sprinted toward him, then dove into a slide, taking out the gargoyle ankles with the dagger as I slid past. A few moments later, and he too was reduced to rubble. I helped Vedi to his feet. He smiled broadly at me.
Where did you learn to fight? Did they teach you at the palace?
He was flabbergasted. No, that was my first time, I said with shaky hands.
Then you have a warrior's heart. But what should I expect from the heir of Brandon the Conqueror?
He said, clapping me on the back. I smiled and kept a tight grip on the dagger, but my hand was bleeding again. The pain in my shoulder was agonizing. All I wanted to do was get out from underneath this mountain and back into the fresh air. Exhausted, we ended up stopping in the cave to get a few hours of sleep. I slept with the dagger in my hand. I felt that whatever might come at us, Vedi and I could handle it. But Vedi had been strangely quiet since the battle. In fact, he had hardly spoken at all. The next morning was no different. He spoke very little as we made the final trek out of King's Rest. The quiet was fine with me, for my thoughts were solely on finding something to eat. Finally, we saw light emanating from something other than our torches. We had made it out of the cave. I closed my eyes as the warm sunlight streamed over my skin. I was so happy to be back in the daylight and warmth. I spread my arms wide as to soak up as much of the sun rays as possible, and actually smiled for the first time since my father had been murdered. I took a deep breath of the fresh air, and opening my eyes, I turned back to Vedi, and the smile fell from my lips. He had a savage look in his eyes, and an arrow notched in his bow. He pulled the string back, and I realized the arrowhead was pointed at my heart. I was shocked.
I don't want to do this. Just toss me the dagger.
Vedi commanded. What? I don't understand, I said in a pleading voice. I thought we had become a team in the cave. Did that battle in the tomb mean nothing? My breath was tight in my chest as I asked, why would you do this?
Samara, I'm a bounty hunter, and right now you have the biggest bounty in the kingdom.
But I thought we had a deal.
Guess not. Now drop your dagger, or the missing princess will never be found.
His voice was eerily quiet as he spoke those words. I tossed my dagger a few feet away from me. Vedi kicked the cuffs to me, and I stifled a sob as I bent down and reached for them. When I grabbed them, I looked up at Vedi, who had gone completely still and not looking at me, but off in the distance toward the edge of the woods. I followed his gaze across the rocky clearing, down the path to the tree line. There, standing completely still, was one of the statues from the village. It was still wearing the clothes, although now they were tattered rags. In the trees, I could see a dozen more statues surrounding us. I turned back to Vedi, meeting his eyes, wide with fear, with my own. Sweat beaded up on his forehead. I dove for the dagger, barely grasping it before Vedi tried to snatch it from me. I was quick, and though it was just but a small tousle, I wound up slicing his hand, a warning, and he backed off. The statues were running toward us now. I readied my weapon and steeled my spurt. Vedi re-notched his arrow, which had also come loose during the tousle, and all chaos ensued. I dove between two statues with my magic blade slicing across one's chest, reducing it to rubble. Just when the other was about to strike me, it was struck with an arrow. I don't know how long the battle lasted. I waved my dagger arm about wildly, sending bits of rubble flying through the air. I was only hit once, but the impact was so intense it sent my flying to the ground. Luckily, I was of enough value to Vedi that he rescued me from the oncoming enemy by hacking his limbs off with his swords. Then there was only one left. It launched its attack against Vedi, dual swords versus stone, a fairly even match. I watched for a moment from where I still lied on the ground. The statue was missing an arm from a lucky slice of mine. It actually seemed like Vedi was wearing it down. I was terrified, and every inch of my body hurt. I was bruised and battered from the battle, bleeding in places I didn't know I could bleed. After a brief moment of hesitation, I took a deep breath of the clean mountain air and sprinted into the lush forest, away from all of the madness. Chapter 3. My eyes darted all around me, trying desperately to find a place to hide myself from the world. I made my way through a thicket and found a hollowed-out log. Relief poured over my body as I crawled inside, pulling outside branches in front of the opening. Finally alone, I began to cry. It was all too much. Everything I'd experienced in the last 2 weeks was a lot to process. It was a lot to process Vedi's betrayal. The violence of the battle, but also the worst part, that I had left Vedi he might possibly die. What chance did he have against a living statue without the dagger? Yes, he had been wrong to betray me, but I was equally wrong to leave him there to die. I wiped my tears on the back of my hand and resolved to go back and find him. Hopefully he was still alive. I went back to the tomb entrance first. There was lots of rubble from the battle, but no Vedi. Then I spotted a trail of blood and followed it a few yards into the trees, and there he was. He was covered in blood and dust, and he wasn't moving, which led me to fear the worst. Guilt welled up in my chest, but I knelt down to check for a pulse. His sleeve was soaked with blood, but I almost cried out with relief when I found a pulse. I dragged Vedi a little ways, underneath the overhang of a large boulder protruding from the ground where it was dry and sheltered. My body struggled every step of the way. He was so heavy. Once I had him situated, I foraged for the Valen's flower. I gathered berries and nuts, too, along the way. It felt strange, being in such a beautiful place on such a beautiful day, despite everything that had happened. Squirrels and rabbits frolicked in the tall grass, darting between trees beyond view. A bluebird was singing, big puffy clouds wafted in the sky, and I was lightheaded and exhausted. Where the statue had hit me was swollen and throbbed mercilessly. Nevertheless, I filled my bag with supplies. Once back at our makeshift camp, I tore a bit of Vedi's clothes into ribbons and bandaged his wounds with the medicinal Valen's flowers. Then I ate my fill of the berries and fell asleep underneath the shade of the boulder. When I awoke, the sun was still low in the sky. My body was so stiff that I could hardly lift my head. I looked over to where Vedi had been asleep, but he was gone. I breathed a sigh of relief. At least that was over. He hadn't put the shackles on me while I was asleep, and really, that is all I could ask for. Suddenly, a savory smell met my nose, and I began to hear the crackling of a fire. I turned over to see Vedi sitting, tending to a small fire. He was cooking a piece of meat speared through by an arrow. He looked terrible. His face was swollen to the point where he was hardly recognizable.
There's a village a couple of days away, Vedi spoke up. Once we are able to move, we will head there, but we'll have to walk. The horse is gone.
He informed me, rather casually. Okay, like this would be a good place for another chapter. I waited patiently at the edge of the forest, while Vedi sold some of the goods he had stolen from the tomb. Apparently, when I had left him outside of King's Rest, the statue had lost interest in Vedi because they had been sent to look for me, not him. The town was bigger than a village, but was sedile, and the main streets had several storefronts. My freshly cut hair fell around my face like a curtain. That had been Vedi's idea, to make me look as different as the missing princess as possible. We entered a bar named the Crow's Nest, and took a seat at a table near the back. The interior of the bar was grimy, and there was what appeared to be bloodstains on the floor. The entire place was filled with a foul smell that I assumed to be a combination of stale beer and body odor. Before long, a waitress who looked like the type of woman you would expect to see working at a Sindin like this made her way over to our table Her eyes were hollow, and her blatant cleavage made me slightly uncomfortable. She smiled at Vedi when she saw him and greeted us by saying,
"Well, if it is not the fearless bounty hunter, Vedi."
Her brow furrowed when she saw his condition.
"Dear Lord, you look rough. Surely this little wretch you dug up didn't give you that much trouble."
Her insult stung. As the daughter of a king who also, by chance, had the power to bring stone statues to life, I had never before experienced such teasing.
No, but the man that she ran away with to marry could pack quite a punch.
Vedi jested, glancing sideways at me. My cheeks burned at the institution. The waitress smiled and swatted at him.
"Shame on you breaking up an elopement. Where's your heart?"
It's in my pocketbook, of course.
Vedi replied with a smile. The waitress sighed.
"So what will you be having then?"
Vedi ordered 2 portions of stew and ale for him and nectar for me. We did not speak as we waited for our food. I tried to on the other patrons seated near us, but our position at he back table made it difficult. However, I was able to catch snatches of worried conversation. Something about people being forced to leave home among hushed tones. I didn't know what, but something was definitely going on in the village. The waitress came back with our food and laid down 2 piping hot bowls of stew in front of us. If I was back at home in the palace, I might have turned my nose up to such gruel. But now, after not having had a real meal in weeks, just the smell made my mouth water. As the waitress pulled away, Vedi grabbed her arm, saying,
I've been off on this job for a few weeks. Is there any news going about?
Her eyebrows shot up.
"Is there? Let's see. Where to start? The king has signed a decree conscripting all men to join the military. Rumor has it we are preparing for war. Taxes have been doubled. Lots of the men in our village have been sent letters commissioning them into the king's army."
I made myself focus on the conversation. I could wait a few moments before devouring the stew. Has there been any news of the princess? I asked. Vedi glanced in my direction, and I caught the warning in his eyes.
"Nope. She hasn't turned up either. She saw what was coming and got the hell out, if you ask me."
Thank you, Beatrice.
Said Vedi. She nodded and eyed me as she walked away. When we were done with our food, Vedi said, I know of an inn nearby. We will stay there tonight, I nodded, heaving my bag over my shoulder just in case. My bag now contained my sketchbook and ink, the dagger. Within an hour, I found myself at the inn, a room at the inn. It was amazing. There was a bed, a fireplace, and most exciting of all, there was a bathtub. Almost as soon as we arrived, Vedi left, saying he had business to attend to, so I had the place to myself. I wasted no time and drew a steaming bath. Ah, the hot water against my skin felt heavenly. The inn even supplied rye soap. How long had it been since I had been clean, really clean? As I lay there soaking in the tub, my mind wandered. I thought of my mother and my stomach twisted with worry for her. She was so sweet, yet so strong at the same time. Did the shapeshifter know that she knew the truth? I hoped with all of my heart that she was okay, but I knew it was only a matter of time before the shapeshifter killed her, or worse. My mother was so kind she had not been raised in a castle, or even wealthy she had married my father for love. Not for a title or recognition. She did not deserve this. I had to get back and rescue her, but before that I needed to get away from Vedi. I did not know what his intentions were, and he had already tried to betray me once. I spotted a carriage for hire in town. Perhaps I could make that my escape. I could leave no tracks for him to follow, and now that I had the dagger, I could handle any statues that I came across on the road. By the time Vedi came back, I had finished my bath and was absent-mindedly sketching the barmaid in my book. I watched him discreetly as he settled in, noticing the coin bag dangling from his trousers. I would need that if I were to hire the carriage to return me to Sedile.
So with the king dead, who would be the rightful leader of Lapis?
Vedi spoke without warning.
Obviously, the queen has no claim to the throne, being of common blood.
The question caught me off guard. I considered my answer carefully. Under normal circumstances, it would have fallen to my uncle, the king's younger brother,
But he is dead?
replied Vedi. I don't know. I haven't given it much thought. I am my father's heir, being his only child. But I'm only a 13-year-old girl. Perhaps it would fall to one of my male cousins or a member of the court.
So you're telling me that you could be the rightful ruler of the kingdom?
Vedi queried, realizing the situation. Theoretically, yes. But right now, a war-mongering shapeshifter sits on the throne. I sighed as anger welled up inside me. Show not tell. How do you show anger in yourself? I don't know what his plan is, but I will not allow him to put my people in danger.
And just what do you think you can do to stop him?
Vedi chuckled. I'm going to stop him, I retorted, irritated by his condescending tone. I waited an hour after I was sure that Vedi was asleep before I crawled out of bed. I steadied my breath. I had to be silent if this was going to work. I tiptoed over to Vedi's cot. My heart pounded in my chest. If he awoke, I would be no match for him, even with my magic dagger. I tried not to think about what he might do if he caught me. Another step, and I was standing over his sleeping body. I had watched the money bag carefully. It was currently stuffed into a hidden pocket inside of his jacket. Vedi slept fully clothed so that he could be ready in a moment's notice. Slowly, I pushed back his jacket and saw that the top of the heavy money sack was poking out at the top. I gently pulled at the corner of the sack, but its weight tugged on the jacket as well, so I grabbed at the cloth beneath the pocket to hold it in place. My hands were sweaty. Finally, the coin bag slid out of the pocket into my hands. Vedi stirred in his sleep, and I took a quick step toward the door. It was time to go. A few silent strides, and I was at the door. I put my hand on the handle and stopped. There was a rattling on the other side of the door. The door handle jolted under my hand. Someone was on the other side, trying to break in. Vedi inhaled sharply as he was beginning to wake up. Panic seized my chest, and I clutched the money bag, still in my hand. If Vedi woke up and saw me, I took a deep breath and slid the lock back on the door. I stepped back into the darkness of the room. When the door swung open, nobody was there. All I saw was the dark hallway. I sighed with relief. My mind was just playing tricks on me. I stepped into the hallway and quietly closed the door behind me. The hallway was dimly lit, but now all I had to do was make it to the street and find that carriage driver. I should have enough money to make it all the way across the kingdom. I stepped out into the dark hallway, and then someone grabbed me from behind a hand clamped over my mouth. The person behind me was bigger than me, shoving me down the hallway. I pulled the dagger from my waistband. From the fleshiness of the hand, I could tell that this was not a statue. I had never killed a real person before. I took a deep breath, preparing to lunge the dagger through my assailant.
Shh. It's me, Beatrice. I'm here to help you, princess.
The woman released me. I turned and saw that it was indeed the waitress from the bar. She stared at the dagger in my hand, and I tucked it away.
Follow me,
she said, leading me out the back door of the inn and down the alleyway. Why did you come for me? I asked, unsure if I should trust her.
because I know who you are. Vedi is a bounty hunter. He will give you to whoever offers the most money.
I followed her through the back door of the crow's nest. It was small. There was one bed, a wash basin, some clothes scattered about, and a small table with 2 chairs. This must be where she lived. She poured 2 cups from a pitcher of water on the table.
Please sit, Samara.
She invited. I sat. How much do you know about what is going on? I asked.
Nothing specific, but I know something is awry in the kingdom. First you go missing, then the tax hike, and men being forced into the military, and that's not even the worst of it. The guardian stones have gone inactive, and magical creatures are flooding into Lapis.
How do you know this?
I listen, and I have my sources. Believe me, princess, what I say is the truth. Otherwise, I would not have risked coming for you.
So this was the shapeshifter's real plan, I thought. to send all of Lapis's soldiers to some foreign kingdom to make war, all the while opening the well-protected borders to demons and monsters, like Itzef, and who knew what else. I couldn't allow this to happen. With the soldiers away, and without the stone guardians, the common people would be overrun and slaughtered. I can stop this, I said, my voice sounding much more confident than I felt.
How?
With this. I pulled out the magic dagger, the pale stone glinting in the low light. The king has been murdered, and a shapeshifter has taken his form, as well as his rightful place on the throne. I can stop him with the dagger. It is our only hope. Beatrice was silent as her eyes drilled into mine. I did not break her gaze. She finally nodded and said,
Take my horse. Ride through the night. Trade him for a fresh one if you have to. Every minute more creatures cross our borders. There's no time to lose.
The wind blew my hair back as I galloped through town on Beatrice's young mare. I could only imagine how long it had taken Beatrice to save up enough money to buy her. As I passed by the inn, I noticed light pouring out of Vedi's bedroom window. Chapter 4. The sight of my home city filled me with joy. I rode into Sedil as the sun was rising, and through the gate I could see the crowded streets smell the bakery shops wafting through the air. Somewhere I heard the faint laughter of children, and I smiled. Halt! 2 armed guards commanded me at the city gate. They were but young boys, but their blue armored uniforms looked spiffy on them. State your business in Sedil. I pulled back my riding hood and announced loudly, I am Princess Samara, returning home. There was a stiff moment where I thought that they might not recognize me, but then they kneeled before me. People in the streets turned and gasped when they saw me. My hair had been cut and dyed, and my clothes were undoubtedly soiled from the long, hard journey. Would you be so kind as to gather a company to escort me to the castle gates? Of course, milady, the taller one responded eagerly. Soon I was surrounded by a company of city guards, and I felt a light wave of relief when the captain of the guard joined us. The plan I had thought up along the ride was risky, and it would depend on them. As we made our way down the main street, I watched as news of my arrival spread like wildfire, at first whispers, then shouts, as the townspeople started following us toward the palace. With all of the strange news floating around, I could not condemn their curiosity. In fact, I was counting on it as I trotted through the city with my procession. I wearily eyed all the intricate statues that had been generously scattered throughout the city. They were each a work of art. I rode past a statue of a small child frozen mid-laugh. At one time they had made me feel safe, but now their effect felt like more of an entrapment. It alarmed me that my enemy could bring them alive at will, making the small laughing child a nearly unstoppable force. When my father commissioned the work, I never imagined that they might someday be used against us. The idea was that if the city ever came under siege, we would have an army of statues at the ready. My breath caught in my chest as we walked through the open castle gate. On the other side of the open plaza, in front of the castle doors, stood my mother and father. Do not leave my side, I told to the soldier leading my escort. He nodded to the others. I hoped they did not have orders to kill me on sight. As we slowly made our way across the plaza, I silently prayed to the forgotten god. I stopped 15 feet away, and so did my guard. The people from the city poured in around us. There were so many of them, from all walks and stages of life, rich and poor, young and old. I faced my father. No, I reminded myself, this man may look like my father, but it is not my father. I can do this. I am the rightful ruler of this kingdom, and as such, I have to protect my people, no matter what the cost. I swung down from the horse, and the guards parted, allowing me to approach the shapeshifter.
Samara, my love, how I missed you.
He smiled and outstretched his hands. Seeing him was like rubbing salt into my wounded heart. Bile rose in the back of my throat at the sight of his smile. How I wished that it was real. How I wished he was truly my father. I tried to calm myself down. The shifter was saying something, but I did not hear it as I took in my surroundings. My mother stood completely still. She was wearing her makeup thick, but it did not hide the bruises. The past several weeks had been hard on her. I met her eyes, and they were full of tears. On either side of the castle door was a guardian statue. They were giants, nearly 15 feet tall, each armed with a spear and shield. I would have get them out of the way. I locked eyes with the shapeshifter. They were the same color that my father's had been, but I had never seen such dark malice in my father's eyes. He held out his arms, as if expecting me to come to him. I cleared my throat. "What have you done with my father's body, shapeshifter?" The people around me stirred, but I didn't dare take my eyes off of him.
She is clearly delusional. Guards, bring her to me.
And the captain made a move toward me. "If you give me to him, I will be dead by the end of the day. He killed the king and has been trying to kill me too,"
Princess, you're not making any sense.
said the captain, turning toward me. "Captain, have you heard the reports of creatures flooding across our borders? Do you really think that my father would allow that?" The captain paled.
How did you know about that?
The shapeshifter snarled at me now, and I felt a low rumble in the ground. I stepped forward, pulled out the dagger, and held it at my side. The tattered blue ribbon waved in the breeze. "Captain, ask him something that only the king would know, just to be sure," I said, taking another step toward the shapeshifter while eyeing the ring on his index finger. We were not so far apart now. The captain looked at me through squinted eyes, but asked in a loud voice,
Your Majesty, forgive my insolence, but what was it that you whispered in my ear when you appointed me captain of the guard?
I don't have to answer your questions.
The shapeshifter roared.
I am the king, and I order you to throw her into the dungeons now.
I don't think so,
Said the captain, drawing his sword. The shapeshifter pointed at me. I rushed him and lashed out with my dagger. I hit my mark and sliced through flesh. In slow motion, I saw the shapeshifter's index finger with the ring still on it sever from his hand. He roared in pain. On the edge of my vision, I saw the stone guardian statues advancing on the guards. I rushed toward the closest one, but something grabbed my hair and yanked me back. Pain tore through my scalp. The shapeshifter had grabbed me by my hair and yanked me down to the ground. I cried out in pain, and tears welled in my eyes as he dragged me along the cobblestones. I heard the sounds of the guards battling with the guardians, and knew they wouldn't last long. I also heard screams from deeper in the city.
Protect the princess.
I heard the captain of the guard yell. Right then a guard rushed into my view, and the shapeshifter dropped me in order to defend himself. Right in front of my eyes, the shapeshifter dodged a sword blow and lashed out with claws that hadn't been there a moment before. The guard's blood sprayed about, and I screamed. For a moment, I was frozen in terror at the sight of the battle, but then I remembered that I had a job to do. I was the princess, and I must protect my people. I scampered to my feet and ran toward where the giant statue was battling with the guards. The guards' weapons had little effect on the statue, and several bodies were already lying on the ground, wounded or worse. I ran behind the statue. It twisted and swiped its massive spear at me, but I dropped to the ground in a slide. I felt the wind as the spear passed just inches from my face. I jumped back to my feet inside the statue's guard and slashed both of its kneecaps. Dull blue light shone as its knees began to crumble. I barely jumped out of the way before the statue tumbled to the ground. The statue's massive arms flayed wildly, hitting one guard and sending him flying. I jumped onto its torso and stabbed my dagger through its head, ending its short-lived life. I stood up with a sigh as I felt the impact of yet another impending duel. I was thrown down and pinned to the ground by a stone cheetah, its sharping claws digging in my shoulders. Its weight was too much to take. My entire body screamed in pain, but I managed to shove the dagger through its stomach, and it crumbled on top of me before I was done for. I dug myself out of the rubble, blood streaming down from where the claws punctured my skin. I looked around at the Oz statues were waylaying my men. More kept on emerging from my father's statue garden, which I did not understand. I had cut the ring off of the shapeshifter's hand. Shouldn't that have stopped this?
Samara,
I looked across the plaza there, with his bow and arrow pointing directly at me, was Vadi. My heart stopped. He was here to kill me. I had stolen the money, and now he was going to kill me. He shot the arrow and I closed my eyes. He would not miss. I heard a thud beside me and opened my eyes. The arrow! It had hit the wooden beam behind me, missing my head by just inches. He missed. That was not like him. I looked at him, then at the arrow, and I saw it. The ring was on the arrow shaft. I rushed over and pulled the free. Then I heard a scream of pain. The shapeshifter was dueling two of the guardsmen with my father's sword. Just as he slashed one across the back, I took a deep breath and put the ring on.
I felt cold power flow throughout my body and my chest began to feel hard, solid actually. I called to the sword and it embraced me back, enveloping my soul with an outer shell of stone. Then I grabbed it and forced it to bend to my will. I focused on the shapeshifter. He had taken my father from me. He had hurt my people. My anger flowed, merging with the magic. The battle suddenly stopped. All of the statues were completely still. Then in unison they all trooned toward the shapeshifter, who was now a mixture of man and monster with claws and fangs. Panic and realization flashed across his face, and as his eyes met mine, the statues charged toward him. His body folded in on itself. In a moment he had transformed into a large crow and shot into the sky. It all happened so quickly, he just flew over the castle wall and was gone. I roared in frustration, for he had gotten away. Suddenly all of the fight went out of me and my throbbing, bleeding body collapsed from exhaustion. My mother was by my side as I began to weep. Taking my face in her hands, she said,
I'm so proud of you, Samara. You have become the princess that I always knew you would.
I embraced her, and we hugged for a long while. It was soon determined that the shapeshifter's rare ability to transform into smaller animals is how it was able to slip past the Guardian Stones. There were still other creatures that he had allowed to enter the kingdom, but with the Guardian Stones active again, it was just a matter of hunting them down one by one. My father's body was found in a root cellar. It felt strange walking through the King's Rest again so soon. My father's sarcophagus was beautifully decorated with ornate carvings and letters. His story filled nearly the entire space. I did not cry at the funeral, for my tears had already been spent. Now I needed to be strong for my people. I looked between my father's tomb and the wall that hid Brandon's. They had both been good kings, powerful kings. Their blood ran in my veins, and I knew that the future of Lapis was secure. I would make sure of it.